just lost my best fucking friend. I don't care what I look like today. I don't care if I wear makeup. And there's something really beautiful about being so rooted in your constitution in that moment as a human being that you're unaffected by societal standards. As a kid, I always imagined death. I was kind of obsessed with it. Specifically, after my mom died, I remembered ruminating over both of my parents' deaths. When I was a child, when I was like 8, that young, I would think about them dying often.
Wow.
Probably more than most kids. And it wasn't even like, I wasn't doing it to scare myself. It just was happening naturally. Oddly, throughout the decades of that and doing that, I think it was my way of preparing myself to release them and coming to terms with it. Because I believe the same, that we need to face death in a graceful way and in a way where it's not an ending. And it's so hard for us to understand that. Psychedelics help.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think psychedelics are very important to help people have ego death and to also face death in a different way and view it in the multidimensional experience that it is. And
that's their main benefit.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And Alan Watts has this really great teaching where he talks about viewing skulls and looking at skulls and how important it is to face death and look at it from that perspective. And then, of course, you mix in our Western medicine and our Western ideology surrounding life and death, which is just so limited in its puritanical teachings and limited in its modern ideologies. For me, it's like, okay, there's the Kubler-Ross method and the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grieving. And we've made this beautiful emotional experience some mathematical graph. So grieving is just these stages. That's kind of like why when I was doing the episodes when my mom was dying and I was doing the podcast, I thought, okay, well, this is the stage I'm supposed to be in, but I feel all the other stages. And then when you're in another stage that you're supposed to be in, you're in the first one. And so you learn that it's all very a personal experience going through grief.
Right. Who's Kubler-Ross?
Kubler-Ross were 2 doctors that discovered, they were psychologists and maybe a psychiatrist that discovered kind of what the consistent emotional stages were after someone experienced a loss or a death. Basically, it became the framework for grieving, the stages of grief.
Can you explain those linearly?
Well, there's denial, which is usually the first stage where you're just in shock of the event. And I do believe in that. It's kind of like when you're in like a car accident or something really traumatic. You don't necessarily remember everything. Yeah. That's like a survival tactic for your brain. We got to let me just look them up because I can't remember them because I've sort of shunned them from my brain because I feel like there's so many other dimensions of grieving and loss that, like I was saying, it can't just be these 5 stages.
What are what's bargaining?
Bargaining is when you're trying, I went through that and you probably have gone through it just in all different levels of grief where you are just, if I could have done this, if I just had said the one thing, maybe if I didn't leave as early, or it's kind of like regret. It's kind of like a form of regret.
Oh yeah, definitely been there.
Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Those are the 5, but then there's also thought to be 7 stages: shock and denial, pain and guilt, anger and bargaining, depression, reconstruction, and then acceptance. So that's a more modern stage of grief, of explaining grief.
Do you think there's more dimensions than even that 7 state, or is it just non-linear? It's highly personal.
Non-linear, highly personal. And there's also, this beautiful connection to authenticity. They don't talk about the authentic emotions you feel where you're just, and they might be driven by anger. They might be driven by depression or driven by bargaining, but you're in this sort of, I don't give a fuck. I just lost my best fucking friend. I don't care what I look like today. I don't care if I wear makeup. And there's something really beautiful about being so rooted in your constitution in that moment as a human being that you're unaffected by societal standards. That keeps so much of us down because we're not living up to this. I love how Jim Carrey said it, avatar that we've created.
Yeah.
To fit into this, to be a peg in this fucking machine. And this machine that has created a graph for the emotional experience of loving someone. And so, yes, you will experience those stages, but there's so much more beauty to it. You'll get these vivid memories that feel like experiences that you forgot about. You'll talk to your parents in a way that you didn't speak to them, or your loved ones in a way that you didn't speak about them or to them while they were living. You learn things about people posthumously that you didn't know. My mom sold weed. She called herself Giselle and was giving out weed from the fucking house.
What? You found this out later?
This after she died.
Oh my God.
That's awesome.
Called herself Giselle, was handing out weed. I was like, where's she getting the weed? This lady bought boxed wine. Now all of a sudden I'm like, this is like Breaking Bad. So there's so much more to it. There's so many more dimensions to the process of grief that we've limited ourselves, because I think in the society that we live in, it's just, you get 6 months to lose somebody and that's it. Do you know that in the DSM, which is the basically the book that contains all of the mental disorders and psychological mental illnesses, do you know that they consider grieving for a year prolonged grief, and that it's a diagnosable, it's something that you could be medicated for?
Prolonged grief?
Prolonged grief, a year.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you imagine having someone you've loved for your entire lifetime and they say if you're still sad after a year, there's something wrong with you?
That's
Yeah,
insane.
Just because they
Grief.
can sell you a medication that way.
Yeah.
Get on
good
Lexapro.
business.
But grief also never ends. Like, the loss of somebody is always going to be a loss of somebody. Like, friends that I've lost when I was, 13, I still grieve, and you know what I mean? Like, how can you possibly put a time limit on it? That doesn't make any sense.
It's like that chart, it's like death is sacred.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And grief is a part of death, and it's sacred. And you just took all the sacredness out of it with that chart. You just made it this linear, intellectual, very emotionless, sterile thing, as opposed to an experience. And by creating that box around grief, you are essentially creating a resistance that will lead to a deprivation of that person having other experiences within the world of grief, within the world of honoring and everything you just said, your loved one. It is incredibly reductive. Yeah, I've never thought of that.
Yes.
But also, though, this was I don't know when this was created, but also, if you look at like our parents or our grandparents or whatever, they didn't even have the ability to talk about grief.
Right.
It was like you push it down, right? So for somebody like that, having maybe a list of being like, here's some of the things that you might experience would be helpful.
Yes.
Nowadays, like our generation, younger generations, like we're fine with talking about our emotions and fine with talking about what's going on. But for our like older generations, they didn't have that luxury.
I agree.
And so a list like that makes a lot more sense for somebody in that state where, they're like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on with me. I feel like I'm losing my mind. And they see this list and they're like, oh, well, I get it. This is something, I didn't realize that was something I could go through. So it's both.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree. Absolutely. I think it was 50s or 60s.
Well, that
so
makes
during
sense.
that time where, dads, their emotions were in a glass and moms were in the bathroom powdering their nose and covering up the bruise.
You mentioned a few things around memories coming back, finding out information about them, having conversations with them, a deepening of spirituality. Did your spirituality deepen?
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
It changed me. It changed every fiber of who I am and who was in my life, how I showed up for people in my life, how I walked.
How so?
It broke me. It broke me apart, and it forced me to give up the avatar, and it forced me to give up some of the performative side of me and to really make a choice to try to live in the authenticity a little bit more and find a home there, because nothing else mattered. After they were gone, nothing mattered. And that's a real thing. Things just didn't matter for a while. Just being there and feeling their void from my life was all I could think about. And then the real question that I kept asking myself is, who am I if I'm not theirs? Who am I if I'm not somebody's daughter? Who am I without Joe Peluso and without Nancy Finley?
But you'll always be their daughter.
I'll always be their daughter.
Yeah.
I feel like that's
Still
also
are.
something you talk about on your podcast. You were talking about how not knowing how to refer to them, if they, they are this, or they are were or are. Now I'm
present,
past, present,
Yeah,
whatever.
tense.
But
Yeah.
for me, like when I talk about even friends or loved ones or family or whoever who've passed, I still believe that they're still here, just like in another form. So I still talk about them in the present tense, if that makes sense. Like for my grandma, I'm like, she is this. Like she always, because that as long as her energy is still with me and the memories and whatever form she's in now, like she still is that being.
Yes.
Like, so
when you think about it, like there's this poem about death, and basically the idea of it is I'm right around the corner. I'm not gone. I'm in the other room. I haven't left. I'm down the street.
Absolutely.
I won't be gone forever. I'm just out of your sight for now.
Absolutely.
And that's all it really is.
God, that does feel like that. That's wild.
And we're all kind of, Ram Dass used to say we're all walking each other home.
100%. 100%.